Welcome to Joy in the Breakthrough, a podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds. Leaders who have found power in being broken open. I'm Connie Lindsey.
And I'm Anna Valencia. We are your hosts, and we believe that our challenges can lead to breakthroughs, and we want to share those insights with you.
We hope these stories will inspire you to explore the I'm possible in you.
And today we are joined by the Lindsey sisters, Dr. K. Lindsey. We are so excited to have you. We actually, when we were researching this podcast, we had a homework assignment, and Connie and I interviewed you, and you were such a delight to speak to. And we were saying, okay, watch out, Dr. K, you're going to be on this show. So I'm so happy to have you here. I want to read a little bit of your bio because it's just too extraordinary just to summarize. So Dr. Karen Lindsey is a professor, mentor, and leadership consultant. She currently serves as assistant professor of strategic communications at Elon University in North Carolina. She is also an owner of Lindsey Consulting Group, a business communications and reputation management consultancy. Dr. Lindsey has 20 years of combined corporate communications, higher education, media relations, and marketing experience. Prior to teaching, she was a vice president of higher education sector in Dallas. And on. I'm just going to keep going. She holds a bachelor's art degree in communications from the University of Wisconsin, a master's in corporate communications from Mississippi College, a doctorate from Azusa Pacific University with a research emphasis on organizational leadership, and authoring an academic textbook on strategic communications planning and implementation. And in your spare time, which I don't know how you have spare time, she loves fitness, runs 5Ks, and she is all about finding joy in a fit mind, body, spirit, and career. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Connie, let's dive in.
Awesome. Welcome. This is my baby sister, and I'm just so thrilled that she's here, and you were excellent for us to interview for our first, when we were starting the podcast. But I want to start with, tell us who Karen Lindsey is. Who is Dr. K? Tell us about you.
Well, that's the perfect first question because I think a lot and I research a lot about labels and identity. And so when I think about labels and identity, who am I? I'm a sister. I am a friend. I am a professor. I am a daughter. All of those things, I'm an auntie, all of those things make me who I am. And so when we think about who you are, we often start with labels. And so those are my labels that I often start with. But there's so much more to me than just those labels. And I know that we'll get into it a bit more as we talk. But my passion is now all about what does it mean to be a woman in this society, and how do we progress through just being those labels, those surface labels. And so that's part of my passion.
So our title of our pod is Joy in the Breakthrough. Share with us 2 pivotal moments where you had a breakthrough.
Oh my, well, you know more than anybody. I've had several. Do I only get 2?
Just 2.
The bottom line is there have been several moments in my career and in my life in general. And I'd say the first one started when I had a major medical crisis in 2016 and was actually in the hospital in intensive care, had to have 14 units of blood. I was on an IV, and basically I was being given my last rites at that time. And so I wasn't expected to pull through. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, that was pivotal for me because it just made me think about how, number one, life is so fleeting. And number 2, how we all need someone. Mm-hmm. And so being in that hospital bed, being unconscious for a time, being on morphine, being on all of these different things that I wasn't in my physical self, my mental self, but I knew I was there. Mm-hmm. And I also knew that I wasn't going anywhere. And so for me, that was a pivotal moment, just thinking about life itself. And so I'd say that was a really important one. And then the second one was really pursuing my PhD, just making that decision to leave corporate, mm-hmm. an environment that everybody told me, hey, you'll make more money, you have all of this glamour, this excitement, these titles. And for me, that was not the sweet spot for me in terms of just having that. And so choosing to complete a dissertation, you know that the year I started that, our mother passed away. So there talk about a pivotal moment. And so that also influenced, and I know we'll talk about this as well, but that also influenced what I chose to study for my dissertation topic. So those two would be primarily the moments that I said, life is fleeting, and then don't do things that you don't want to do, whether it's career, whether you're with people, just stop it. And so I'm a big fan of look at those moments and learn from them. And then don't just learn from them, because sometimes we can learn passively. Don't just learn from those moments, but then act on it.
Let me ask you a question, since, we're going in this. We hear a lot about, you make these pivots, but tell us like how you got through some of those feelings, because a lot of it also, when you take a big risk or you pivot, there's fear in that. And I think as women, especially women of color, when you see all the barriers and trying something new and taking risk and fear, how did you accept that or embrace it or push through it?
And I'd say I did all of those. I accepted it, I embraced it, and I pushed through it. That's exactly how you do it.
You make it so easier way than it is.
But tell us, let's unpack that a little bit more.
Okay.
Because I can embrace it and still be scared and paralyzed.
Yes.
I can move through it and come out on the other side.
I love that.
Totally different. So what we want our listeners and viewers to understand is at least give us, because we talk a lot about tips and techniques.
Absolutely.
Give us one or two that we can actually use.
So I would say one of the first things that I tell my students, I tell my clients, is that you need to know who you are. And so I'm naturally a risk taker. Connie and I always joke about this. She's like, oh my God, you moved again. You did this again. You're running a marathon. You're running she always
and
talks about.
I study it.
She talks
I move on it, but
Anna,
Anna knows I'm going to do the research, and it's like, okay, this is what you're doing.
But for me, I knew that I am a natural risk taker. Now, what I also tell people is that being a risk taker doesn't mean you don't have a plan or you just jump in, not knowing what's going to go on. And so I'm a risk taker, a calculated risk taker. So I tend to have a plan. I never have left a job without having another job lined up. I'm always planning my exit and my escape while I have something in my hand. And so that's one thing, being a risk taker. But if you're not naturally that, then know who you are. No, it might take me a year to make that decision, but it might take you 5. And that's perfectly okay, because that's who you are. And so I think number one, knowing yourself. And then number two, when you accept that I'm going to do this next thing, you need to be an absolute student of whatever that next thing is. Who are your competitors? Who else is doing it well? Who's doing it poorly, because you don't want to be like them. And so you look at all of those things, you do your research basically. And again, being an academic, I'm always about the research. And so it's really important that you do your research before you jump in. And then lastly, when you decide that you are going to embrace it and do the next thing, you need to decide, where am I going to do it? What do I need to do it? What tools and techniques do I need? Because you've probably already have some of that, but now even go deeper. And so I'm a big fan of, again, embracing your natural, authentic self, and also then taking the time to research and understand, what do you need to do to embrace and enter into your next act.
I love that.
There's a lovely, you and I had this discussion and have had it a lot. Anna and I did a podcast on mentoring. You have an interesting take on that. I talk about coaching, sponsoring, and mentoring. Give us your take on that kind of support and how you identify that and what you would suggest as the various roles and labels.
Absolutely. So in my research, I, of course, research women in leadership at senior levels of leadership, so VPs and above. And one of the things that I found in my research of women in both corporate environments, nonprofit organizations, politics, in all of these environments, I have found that women need someone, right? We all need someone. And I actually think we all need...
Which is why we're doing this podcast.
Exactly. You got it.
A community.
Right. And so I also think that we all need multiple someones, because we all bring different things to each other. And so from my research, one of the findings that the women basically told me, and I kind of labeled it and categorized it, is this idea of we all need, of course, a mentor. Someone who is there in your organization, who knows how to navigate the levels, the politics, whatever it might be. So you need a mentor, someone that's also going to follow you and kind of nudge you and say, hey, do this a little differently. If they see you speaking or doing something, they might say, you might want to pull back on that a little bit. Mentors are there to kind of tell you how to show up in the workplace, how to navigate what you might be wanting to do next. And then this one is my favorite finding, and that is we need ventors, VENTORs.
Oh, we got a new term now
So
in the
mentors
podcast.
and ventors.
Okay.
And ventors, these are your girls. These are your homegirls. These are the ones that you ugly cry with them.
Or text on a chain.
Or you text on a chain, or you say things that you wouldn't say to people in your organization to them. You share, you can say all the nasty, ugly things, but they will pick you up and love you anyway. And so this really has not much to do with helping me figure out my work issues or my career issues. It has to be, sometimes we just need to ugly cry and say nasty things about people and then ask for forgiveness and move on. And your ventors, these are the women in your life that will do that with you. They will love on you. They will bring you cupcakes when it's your birthday. They do all of these lovely things for you. And so I think that's important to have these ventors. These are people that, again, just you can say these things to. And then, of course, the last one, you both would know this, you need sponsors. And these are the people within the organization. You may not see them every day. They may not be exactly in your line of reporting relationships, but these are the individuals who, they know who you are in the organization. They know your name. They know what you've contributed. And when those new opportunities come up, they're going to say, hey, you need to look at Anna. Hey, you need to look at Connie. And they will mention your name at the table that you maybe not have ever even been around. So we need those sponsors. The other thing about sponsors that I enjoyed from my research findings is that when you have a sponsor, this is also the person who may be at the table when budget decisions are being made.
For sure.
And so when things are being
and raises
cut,
are decided.
you got it. And so when budgets are being cut or when raises are being decided, your sponsor is saying, we have enough in the pot to say, give her this percentage more, or we have enough in the pot not to cut her budget, because if you're at some level where you're in charge of a budget, that could be potentially cut. So we need these three people in our lives. Sometimes I tell people that, people ask me, well, can't the mentor and the ventor be the same? I would not suggest that. Because I think you have very different conversations. Your mentor, again, within the organization, knows your industry, knows your field, and can really, again, help you navigate that career piece, and even on some personal coaching, that sort of thing. But these ventors, again, those are the people that I just want to say what I need to say and be my authentic self around them and not have to, put on all the
it's the safe space, right? It's the safe space.
That's how.
And we've talked about this, Anna and I. You have done this our entire lives.
That's right.
But I want to move into another word that we hear often is authenticity. Your research that you did on women in leadership, you talk about labels and authenticity. How do we find that authentic self? And then guide us into this whole notion of labels and what they mean. And because there's some labels we don't want to own, and people have perceptions about us. So walk through that for us.
So I think as women of color, we're used to being labeled, right? In the workplace, when we show up, the first thing they see, I started wearing my hair naturally. So in the corporate world, I had the straight professional corporate look. And when I started wearing my hair naturally, that was the first thing people noticed about me. They wouldn't ask me about my research. They wouldn't ask me about my education. They would, your hair. Oh, your hair is beautiful. Not who am I? What am I bringing to the table?
And it's the underlying question, your hair.
Right. Your hair, question mark, exclamation
I always wear
point.
my hair straight. And when I was on the campaign trail, I decided to get a blowout and do extra curly. And I showed up and someone, I will not say, but it was another woman saying, we prefer your hair straight. Yes, for TV and for photography. And I was like, exactly.
We prefer
really? I was like, well, I was preferring curly today. So that's what we're doing.
And that's
what
a
we're
huge
bringing.
part of my research is this idea is other people will tell you how they prefer you to look. That is nothing but surveillance. And that is a privilege that certain groups of people have to be able to surveil and say, and police and say how you're supposed to look. Well, who says what is professional? Who says that's how a woman, particularly a woman of color, is supposed to show up in her workplace, in her workspace? And so I think that when we think about labels and all of these things, we as women of color, we know it better than anybody. And it actually can go back to days of slavery, days of liberation for different people of color, and this idea that they have labels in society.
For sure.
Everything that we're called is socially constructed.
Yes.
So it's not real.
And we weren't at the table making those decisions.
That's right.
That's it.
When those,
And even when we are. And
what is
so,
acceptable.
and so while I think there is a need for categorization, there's a ton of research out about why, as humans, our brain needs categories.
Oh, for sure.
But when it becomes labeling and when it becomes confining,
Right.
that's another thing. And so it's so important for us to be aware that people are labeling us on a regular basis, but then do we step into that label? What does that mean?
That's
for
what I was
us?
going to ask you about, leadership identity. How do I know, if I'm starting in my career, for those listeners who might be just starting? Anna and you and I have been at this for a bit, but we're still learning or whatever. How do we get to that leadership identity?
So one of the exercises I do with young professionals, and even when I'm doing public speaking, I do a personal brand exercise. And it's basically where you draw on a page 3 circles. And in one, you put your values. Mm-hmm. We know what values are, I hope. But in one, you put, what is it that I value? Is it family, friendship, career, whatever that is? You put your values. Is it honesty? Is it you can go really deep with that one. In the second circle, you put how you show up. And what I have people do is, how do I show up? Even in my classes, in lectures, sometimes the first day, to get students a little more relaxed, I'll say, okay, pull out your cell phones. So they're automatically freaked out by that because I'm letting them use their cell phones in class. And so what I say is, I want you to call 3 people and ask them for one word that describes you. And they might call their mom, their dad, their sister, their friends. They will call these people, and I'll say, don't tell me the word, but ask them to give you one word, an adjective that describes you. That's how you show up to other people. What they find sometimes is those words aren't consistent with what is in the third circle. How do you describe yourself?
I'm Corliss Garner, guest hosting the next edition of In the Arena. Our guest this week is the Director of Performance and Mental Health for our beloved Chicago Bulls, Dr. Wendy Balabi.
I think about it in that life comes into play and it starts to affect us. And so I help them work through that piece so that way life is not as stressful.
Join the conversation Tuesday at 7 p.m.
And so that is how you find out, who am I as a leader? Who am I? How am I showing up? And so I've had students, they'll call their mom and she'll say, she's intelligent and witty and something else, right? And then they're like, I never thought I was that funny. I never thought that I was witty. Yes. But other people see those things. And so I think as a leader, when you start to think about your identity, take a moment to write things down. I'm a big fan of writing things down, even though we have all the technology.
Notes on your phone, I do that too.
Notes on your phone, but write it down in that moment. And so doing that exercise, it absolutely helps people really think about, this is who I am, this is how I show up. And so now in the workplace, am I showing my values? Am I showing my adjectives that other people believe that I am?
And it's so important to be true to ourselves, though. It's like most people think I'm an extrovert.
Right.
And I'm an introvert. It was me learning how to leverage extroverted tendencies.
Absolutely.
Versus what really fulfilled me. And there was the integration of those two things.
And we always laugh. I always laugh with Connie because, she does all this public speaking and we both do a lot of that. But she is the person that once she's done, she has to retreat. And what I tell people is
and refill and refuel, which is so important.
Right.
We talked about this yesterday.
That's being an introvert.
Yes.
And that's okay.
And even as an extrovert, I'm an extreme extrovert, but I take it to the extra effort and all the way to the edge where then you feel burnt out because you aren't taking the time to rest. I want to go to, one word that came to mind when you're saying all of this that I think in leadership is so important is the self-awareness piece.
Absolutely.
And I am 38 and I have not taken the time. This is the first time in my career that I actually have taken the last year to do some of the exercises that you are talking about.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't even know really my leadership principles or what I'm discovering. But before we move on, I wanted to hit this because I know you have an expert in the mind and the body and the spirit. And as someone that I was talking to, one of my mentors, which I know we're not supposed to be mentors and ventors and sisters, but to Connie, I was saying this yesterday, I'm like, I overschedule because in the back of my mind, I'm saying I'm not doing enough as a leader, as a mom, as a wife. And so I pack my schedule, right? And then I get to this edge where I'm like, okay, I need to I need to back away and rest, but I have a hard time giving myself permission to rest.
So
talk about, give us some
the
tips real quick
self-care,
about what
absolutely.
you've done to really focus on your mind, body, and spirit as a leader, and why it's important.
So I say, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, one of my favorite writers, is that self-care is an act of resistance, meaning that when I choose to take care of my mind, body, and spirit, I'm actually going to be better, stronger, smarter, all the things that I think I want to do. But I also would say to you that as a person who's saying, I'm not being a good mom, a good leader, I'm not doing all these things, and so I'm overscheduling, who sets that standard? Is it society or is it you?
It's me.
Okay.
It goes back to, and I worked with this on my coach in our last episode, we talked about this. There's this always back of the, I'm not doing enough, therefore I'm not enough. And when you are aware of it, and I came aware of it yesterday, and that's where I was talking to my mentor and sister over here, and giving myself that permission.
So I think that's tip number one.
Mm-hmm.
So tip number one, again, is understanding and identifying that you're doing that. So you're on the way.
I did it yesterday.
And then
it took
number
me a few
two is this idea of saying, what is enough? Who decides what is enough? And stopping this idea that it's society that decides that. I get to decide it. And then this idea that who decides that a mother should be this, a leader should be this.
Or we should be married by a certain age.
All of those things.
That judgment piece that
and
comes
so
in.
letting that go. And then the last part of it that I am a big fan of is physical movement. I call it intentional movement. This morning, what did I do? I left the condo and I went for a long walk. Beautiful morning, but I felt refreshed after this. I don't even put on music when I run or when I walk because I want to take in the sounds in that moment. And so finding time, whether it's yoga, meditation, sitting still in a quiet room. So it doesn't even have to be anything spectacular. You don't have to run a marathon or do any of that. So it's just finding that time to step back for your physical self because it's all connected. Mind, body, spirit. It's all connected. So you can't separate them out and say, I'm going to do only this for my mind, only this for my body. Do all of those things in concert. Do all of those things together. And that, I think, is so important to saying, now I feel better in my body. I can give myself permission to do a couple of things. I can take these things off my schedule because I've got to go work out. I've got to go sit in the quiet room in the dark and just, be at peace.
And be okay with it.
And be okay with it.
Not to judge ourselves. What brings you joy?
Ooh, what brings me joy? Being with my sister brings me joy. But I would also say being in the classroom teaching, because I'm at a point in my career now where it is about influencing or having an impact on the next generation. So even though I've only been teaching for 7 years, I get letters and notes from students, and I've shared some of them with you that say things like, thank you for helping me. Now, what's interesting is it's not always about the content of the class that I taught. Sure. It is usually about some little coin of wisdom or something that I said about being your authentic self and that it's okay. I do this thing all the time with my seniors about your first job isn't your forever job necessarily. Right. So stop stressing so much about that. Get the job, learn something, do the internships, learn what you like and don't like. And if you don't like it, it's so okay to pivot, right? To change. Sure. So it brings me joy to speak into that next generation, to speak into young people and their lives. And it's not always easy, but it is my most joyous moments. And I love it when, again, they come back to me and they say things that I've said that I don't even remember saying sometimes. That is just a beautiful moment. And so that brings me a lot of joy.
We are going to go to our tips and techniques segment. Dr. K has already led us in there with great gems. And so we want to, Connie and I, leave you with a tip and technique. And mine today, from what this beautiful conversation has led me to, is still some self-affirmation. My friend, Bella Gande, who's going to be a guest on our podcast, she told me to say, if I ever feel uncomfortable in a room or nervous, to say, I belong here. I belong here. And I still say that to this day, even before giving a speech. So that's my tip and technique today. If you ever feel you don't have the courage, just repeat, I belong here, I belong here, I belong here. Connie, what's yours?
I love that. Mine is, what do you say when people are saying things in a conversation, particularly as a woman, sometimes whether it's inappropriate humor, how do you respond to that? And what I often say is, it's centering yourself very clearly, but also following up with a question. And one of my favorite things to say is, are you okay? It puts the onus back on the individual who is making a statement that might be inappropriate, but it certainly makes them think about it. It allows me to maintain my composure, that internal equipoise that we talked about before. Are you okay? or help me understand. A good or more beautiful question can really, really help us get to that place.
And always we end our segment with say less, because Connie has taught us to say more while saying less. What do you got for us today, Connie?
Today I've got a phrase that my grandmother, Karen and I would know this, our father's mother, would often say, and that's cover all the ground you stand on. Dr. K shared a lot with us about ways to make sure that the labels that are given to you are labels that you choose, that you own, and that you can live into. So covering all the ground you stand on means that you identify, understand clearly who you are. Those circles, those concentric circles, they're connecting, and that you realize no matter how big or how small that circle is as you perceive it, cover it all. We suggest you cover it all with joy, cover it all with knowledge, and always with love.
And so wish we had more time to talk to Dr. K. I have a million questions, and I'm sure you do too. If you want to follow her at her Twitter handle at DRKLINZY, and you can follow us on Instagram at Joy in the Breakthrough and leave your questions there. We will try to get to you, our listeners that may have more questions. But as always, thank you so much for joining us with Joy in the Breakthrough, and we will see you in our next episode.